Whitney.
And I'm Camden. Welcome to Ghosts and Garnets, Murder in Idaho.
2023. First episode of the year.
That is wild.
So wild. I know. I can't believe it. I did feel like 22 really dragged. A lot happened in 2022 in my life. And the last few months, the last couple months were the greatest because we got to do this.
I know. It's been so fun. And 2022 was kind of I don't know. I didn't love it.
Yeah.
But I love the end of it.
Samesies. So guys, we are not talking about murder today.
I think this might be worse.
There's some definite ick in this story. There's some trigger warnings we're going to talk about. But we're going to talk about a cult. We are talking about an evangelical cult that is slowly taking over the town of Moscow, Idaho. And they are doing it so quietly and so methodically that they have managed to buy massive amounts of storefront property and land, slowly driving out businesses that are not run by church members and moving toward their leader's vision of an entirely Christian utopia where men can conquer women, and women can do all kinds of surrendering quietly and meekly, and sexual predators are excused for their sins and wrapped in the loving arms of Pastor Doug Wilson.
Ugh.
Who we hate.
So I loathe this man so much. And when you're talking about this Christian utopia where men conquer women and women surrender quietly, it sounds like one of those old romance novel covers that he's wishing he lived in. Like where women were just like, oh, you're so...
The amount of fragile male ego in this story is enough to make a gal violently ill.
Or turn them into a lesbian if they aren't already.
You're not allowed to be a lesbian in Pastor Doug Wilson's utopia. So.
I know. I don't want to be in it. Ever.
Yes. So this is not, we're not covering the story because this guy is a conservative Christian, seriously racist, seriously misogynistic church leader. There are many of those. That's not really a story. We are covering this story because he has twisted this church that he founded into a cult. And the difference is a cult is a group or movement held together by a shared commitment to a charismatic leader or ideology. It is a belief system that has all of the answers to all of the questions you could ever have. And the only solution to those questions is gained by following these rules that the church leader has created. And it is about intimidation. It's about suppression. It's about slowly removing people from any outside influences and really isolating them. And the fact that he has managed to do this so successfully and continuously since the 90s is wild because he is not a quiet cult leader. This motherfucker is on YouTube. He's on Twitter.
He's written how many books? Ugh.
I mean, the things that he says are so revolting. You just think there's no way that this isn't a cult because there are 2,000 people that are following this man.
You'd have to be in the cult to believe anything that this man is saying. He is what gives religion a bad name.
Agreed. Especially Christianity. Because everything he espouses is like, well, the Bible says this. The Bible says this. No, asshole. The Bible does not say this. You are taking the crazy Old Testament stuff and stabbing people with it in the brain.
He said recently to some students at the University of Idaho, everyone can agree that the Bible is sexist, but that the Bible is always right.
Yeah.
What? Oh, he's maddening. He makes me actually crazy.
He is maddening. And he has a couple of degrees. He went to U of I. And one of them, I think his graduate degrees in philosophy, but neither of his degrees are in theology. He has no actual formal education in religious teachings at all.
Mm-mm.
No. And neither do any of his family members that preach and counsel to his congregation.
At his schools, I know. And if you look
Yes.
at their website, at Christ Church's website, and you look at their elders and their teachers, and they're all these old white men. And then there's this one white lady who...
Is it his wife?
No, I don't think it is. It wasn't the same last name. And
okay. No,
she just is probably like, name. Oh, all these white boys love me. I
wish you guys could see Camden right now.
I'm the belle of the ball.
Angel baby face.
All these batshit crazy men. God.
So I stumbled across this Vice article by a reporter, and her name is Sarah Stankkorb. And she wrote this article in September of 2021. And it was this massive, deep dive into the church and years of research and interviews and all kinds of stuff. And I will link the article in the show notes because it is an incredible read and everybody should read it. And we got a massive amount of information that we're going to share with you from this particular article. So I will make sure to share it. All right, we're going to get into it. And this is set in Moscow. The entire world knows what's happening in Moscow right now. We're not going to talk about that today, but we do have on our page a link to where you can contribute to a scholarship fund that one of the victims' families set up. And I'm sure at some point we will be talking about it. But we are not going to be talking about it today.
No, we're going to talk about this dick bag.
Yep, we're going to talk about a dick bag today. For those of you that don't know, Moscow is a university town. University of Idaho is there. Camden and I both went to University of Idaho. We made very poor choices. But Moscow itself is delightful.
Agreed.
It is a little liberal arts mecca in the heart of conservative northern Idaho. And it is strange to me that Doug Wilson chose Moscow as his place to make a conservative Christian utopia because it is predominantly a liberal community. They overwhelmingly voted for Biden in 2020.
I think he did it for that exact reason, is to be the only crazy in this Christian,
that's a good
quote
point.
Unquote, that could get everybody to believe him. He'd be the mecca of it all.
Yeah, that's true. Because I was thinking, God, there are towns in Idaho that are probably 99% there already. You know, you would have very little trouble just making it 100%.
A little fish in a big pond there, but here he's a big fish in a little pond.
That's true. That's a good point. So they're in Moscow. And he has laid this foundation since the early 90s. And he has been working towards this goal of Christian takeover of Moscow, an entirely Christian town. And the people in this church, it's called Christ Church, they're known as Kirkers. And the church is also called Mother Kirk. Most of the members call it Mother Kirk. And it's because apparently Kirk is the name for church in Scotland.
Okay, move along, sir.
Don't bring the Scottish people into this.
Do not.
Doug Wilson.
How dare you.
But anyway, they call them Kirkers. And in Moscow proper, there are about 900 congregants in the town of around 25,000 when school is in session. Over the years, Doug Wilson has built this church with many arms out into different areas of the community. So he has a K through 12 school that's called the Logos School. He has his own publishing house called Canon Press, where he publishes the most wackadoo books you have ever heard. And we are going to share some of his quotes with you. He has an unaccredited pastoral ministry program called Greyfriars Hall and a private college, which is named New St. Andrews. And at the center of it all is Doug Wilson. So we're going to give you a little rundown of Doug's greatest hits to give you a little insight into this brain of his. These are all direct quotes from some of his self-published works. Yeah. Last year, Wilson published a novel called Ride, Sally, Ride, about a Christian man who runs his neighbor's sex bot wife named Sally through a trash compactor. In his book, Father Hunger, the pastor writes, quote, "The sexual act cannot be made into an egalitarian pleasuring party. Instead, he argues that, quote, a man penetrates, conquers, colonizes, and plants, while a woman, quote, receives, surrenders, accepts, and that true authority and true submission are therefore an erotic necessity." Gross, Doug.
Throwing up in my mouth.
His wife is in on it too, guys. Her name's Nancy. She wrote a book called The Fruit of Her Hands. I don't know why they're always with the fruit. The Fruit of Her Hands. And in it, she describes wives as lovely, enclosed gardens, cultivated for marital sex. But of course, a husband is never trespassing in his own garden.
Sick. Sick.
Well, Doug also describes himself as an expert on women and their most important attributes. He said, "I am in a good position to state that there is a marked difference between Christian women and women of the general population. Christian women are a lot prettier." In 2019, Wilson created 6 episodes of a talk show he wanted Amazon Prime to pick up. It was called Man Rampant and featured episodes entitled The Sins of Christian Women, The Sin of Empathy, and The Lie of Servant Leadership. In his book Reforming Marriage, he wrote, "Wives need to be led with a firm hand, and that it is tragic that wholesale abdication on the part of modern men has made the idea of lordship in the home such a laughable thing." In Federal Husband, which is quite a title, he asserts that men must assume full spiritual responsibility for the household, including any wifely negligence to submit in. Then you need to be aware of your woman's spending habits, television viewing habits, weight, rejection of your leadership, laziness in cleaning the house, lack of responsiveness to sexual advances. Such a husband must confess failure in leading his wife, outline clear expectations, and repeatedly point out her failures. If she complies, quote, he must move up a step, requiring another of her duties be done. If she continues to rebel, it is appropriate to call in church elders. Now, let's bring in the racism. He wrote a pamphlet with a Christian minister named J. Stephen Wilkins, and it was called Southern Slavery as It Was. In it, on top of a whole bunch of other garbage, they wrote that, quote, slavery produced in the South a genuine affection between the races that we believe we can say has never existed in any nation before the war or since. I could have gone an hour into this Southern slavery bullshit.
Let me just, because I am going to for a minute. Because,
oh, good. Okay.
And then it said, slave life was to them, the slaves, a life of plenty, of simple pleasures, of food, clothes, and good medical care.
Yes.
It's my turn to be at a loss for words, and it is rare, and I don't think I've ever sighed so heavily and so often in my whole entire life.
I know. This fat man sits on his YouTube channel smoking his cigars and spouting this nonsense at you, and he's so fucking smirky, and you just think, how is he still leading people?
They've drank the Kool-Aid.
They did. They absolutely did.
And he talks about how that whole thing about slavery got misinterpreted and he was misunderstood and he meant it in this way and not this way. And then one student reported being taught at his Logos school the curse of Cain was black skin, and that black is the color of Satan and white is the color of good.
Yes.
Excuse me, sir. Okay, you're not racist. Sure.
Well, and it's interesting that he decided to start this in northern Idaho, where the whitest of the white people congregate.
We see you.
We see you, Doug Wilson.
You just can't stop sighing.
I know.
Okay, so to learn about Christ Church's culture of abuse and social control, Vice interviewed 12 former and current church members and Logos students, and reviewed legal and medical documents, church correspondence, and business filings. Ex-Kirkers described a community in which women are told they must defer to church leaders and cannot say no to their husbands. Men are taught to strictly control their homes, and those who speak out can be isolated and harassed. In a November 2021 investigation, The Guardian found that church figures have browbeaten elected officials over COVID restrictions, built powerful institutions in parallel to secular government, harassed perceived opponents, and accumulated land and business in pursuit of a long-term goal of transforming America into a nation ruled according to its own ultra-conservative moral precepts. Anonymous sources told The Guardian that members of the church were expected to pay at least 10% of their income to the church in the form of tithe.
I feel like tithes are not really here or there, but it is so sketch that so many of their followers are actually employed by the church. So the church pays them and then they have to give 10% of their income back to the church.
Money laundering. Alert, alert, alert. I did find, and I will post it when we post the episode, but I did find a rather interesting picture of what is to be all of the businesses that are run by the church.
Fascinating.
It is. The first story we are going to tell you about is Jean, who, at 16 years old, moved with her mom to Moscow after her parents had separated.
Hold on one second. Sorry to interrupt you. Guys, this is a trigger warning. There are a lot of stories that we are going to tell you about this church that involve all kinds of abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, rape. We don't get super into it, but you will hear about it. So just
Warning.
Just be warned. Sorry, go ahead.
Once they arrived in Moscow, men and children from Christ Church met them at their new home to help unload their moving truck. Jean was charmed by the town and was excited about the move. She was going to start school at new St. Andrew's College, which she thought was just like any other religiously affiliated school, and thought that Christ Church was just another church. This was in 2000. At that time, New St. Andrews had about 150 students. During her first year, Jean met a handsome upperclassman whose father was a deacon at Mother Kirk. By her second year at the college, they had started dating, and he said he wanted to marry her. I had stars in my eyes, remembered Jean. But then he got physical. I was a virgin, and it scared me. Within the first few months of dating, heavy petting had turned into coercive sex. He would essentially get her drunk and not listen to her when she said no. He refused to wear a condom. She had been raised in a very conservative household where purity was preached, and because she had allowed him to take her virginity, she felt she had no choice but to marry him. She said she felt unclean and unworthy. Before they got married, she joined the church, taking the covenant vows in front of the congregation. After taking her vows, congregants introduced themselves and shook her hand, telling her how beautiful she was. Jean would learn that this was a very big deal within the leadership of Christ Church, that they would brag about how their women are more beautiful than pagan wives. 4 years after Jean moved to Moscow, her wedding was officiated by Doug Wilson himself. Beginning 9 months after they were married, they had a baby every other year until they had 4 children. After their first baby was born, Jean said her husband came home drunk one night after she had gone to bed. When she told him she was tired and she didn't want to have sex, he got really angry. She fought him, but he pinned her down and he raped her. He passed out drunk, and she locked herself in the bathroom and cried for hours. And because she had recently had a baby, she also bled internally. She called a female friend that was also a member of the church the following day. When she told her friend what happened, her friend said the same thing happened in her marriage, and that it was normal. Jean did not report it. Jean's husband raped her over and over again, a couple of times a week for about a decade, either with violence or by waiting until after she took a prescription sleeping pill. Sometimes, she said, quote, I'd wake up with him having me, or I'd wake up the next morning and be bleeding or see the signs. After years of this treatment, Jean went to several different pastors at church and told them her husband had been raping her. Although they did notify church leaders, because of her husband's father being an elder, who could be disciplined if his son continued to sin, the pastors of the church told her not to report it and that she was wrong. Her pastors told her that a wife is not allowed to tell her husband no. As Jean's husband's drinking increased, so did the violence against her. He would throw her into walls, shove her into doors, and once pointed a loaded gun at her. He also raped her with a champagne bottle. Again, she went to church leadership, and she was again told not to go to the police and not to separate from her husband. Eventually, she could no longer stay and prepared to leave the church. She knew leaving her husband would mean being excommunicated. A woman's counselor from the church called her after she left, telling Jean that, quote, she was causing her husband to turn to porn now that she was divorcing him. In the time since leaving the Christchurch community, Jean's car has been vandalized regularly. She's been harassed online. She had to block Kirkers, including teachers from Logos, angry about her divorce. She said, I have been called a whore, a bitch, and a cunt. I hate that word so much.
I know, I do too. I never say it. If this was the only story, this is horrifying. All of it is horrifying. But there are 50 stories just like this.
What I can't wrap my brain around is that she told at least 3 people. At least. The very least. And not one person thought, this is wrong.
No, you know what's fucked up is they knew it was wrong. They knew that her father-in-law would get in trouble if it went any higher. And so it became her fault.
Yeah, they made her wrong.
Yes, she was wrong because her husband cannot trespass in his own garden.
If that's not gaslighting, I'm not even sure.
So fucked up. You know, and then she finally has the courage to leave. And then you're in this teeny tiny community within a teeny tiny town. And you have these people harassing you on top of everything else. And women are not allowed to work in this church. So how are you going to leave? You don't have any money. You don't have a job. How are you going to take care of your 4 kids that you've had in 4 years? It really reminds me, have you watched any documentaries on Scientology? It reminds me of that, the harassment after they left. So horrific. And they call it fair gaming.
Super Christian of them. Don't you know?
Yes. On top of the raping of your wife is A-OK, chatter that they gave their male congregants, it was also a pedophile haven. This first story we're going to tell you about, her name is Natalie. And in 2005, she was 14 years old and a member of Christ Church. A Greyfriars Hall student, so the unaccredited pastoral program. His name was Jamin White, who was in his 20s. He started sexually abusing this 14-year-old girl. Natalie reported the abuse to police. Doug Wilson, the head of the church, asked the investigating officer to give leniency to Jamin White. Doug Wilson told the police that their sexual interactions were a result of a parent-arranged courtship, something that Natalie absolutely denied. Despite that, the judge accepted Wilson's narrative and rejected a more stringent agreement under the charges of sexual abuse of a child. After White was convicted on the lesser charge of injury to a child, Christ Church leadership emailed congregants thanking those praying for Jamin White. Following his release from prison, the church funded $3,000 towards sending him on a Haitian mission trip. Then in 2013, he was charged with attempted strangulation of his wife and later found guilty of a domestic battery charge. Doug Wilson also officiated the wedding of Stephen Sittler, a former New St. Andrews student convicted of lewd conduct with a child under 16, despite Sittler's parole officer's objections. Sittler was on lifetime parole due to the number of victims he confessed to abusing and could not be unsupervised with any child ever. Now, Doug Wilson is strangely mixed up in this story. So he encouraged Stephen's father, who had discovered the abuse, to report it to police. But then Doug later welcomed Stephen back into the church with a chaperone. And then at Stephen Sittler's wedding, which Doug Wilson presided over, Doug Wilson explained to the people at the wedding that sometimes people just need to get married so that the flesh can be contained. Ugh. Using a wife as a sexual decoy to distract Sittler from children did not work. Later, a judge ruled Sittler must be chaperoned around his infant son due to admitted sexual stimulation resulting from contact with the baby. Big sigh. The most recent Wilson disciple found guilty of a sex crime is former Christ Church deacon Alex Lloyd, who was indicted for having pornography featuring children under 12 years of age on his phone. He pled guilty last August and was sentenced on December 19th. I do not know what the sentence was. At the time, Wilson said, quote, "We regard this entire tragic episode as one more casualty in the unconscionable pornification of our culture."
Ew. But then he goes on to say in an interview that how dare everybody come after these child molesters and rapists. They're only doing it because they're coming after me and my church. There's tons of other rapists and child molesters out there in the world, but nobody cares because really they're just coming after me. And the people who are in my church who have done that are here to become better people and repent for their sins.
I hate him.
I don't even have an eye roll big enough for when he opens his mouth.
It is the unconscionable pornification of our culture. It's not the fact that you house and coddle sexual predators, Doug. Has nothing to do with you at all. It's the pornification of it all.
Whitney, will you marry me so the flesh can be contained?
Gross. There's nothing grosser than flesh. I hate it. I hate it so much.
Flesh. This guy. Okay, so we're going to talk about the schools a little bit. In 2017, Michaela Peterson, who attended Logos through 11th grade, and other students reported inappropriate touching by one teacher to the Logos school board. According to Peterson, one male teacher would feel up Peterson and other girls in the hallways and rub their backs without permission in the classroom. In one instance, the teacher said to the class, "You see, everything has a male and a female part." Oh, this is so cool. The projector cord...
I cannot.
Shh, let me get this out. The projector cord is the male, and you stick his penis in the outlet's vagina as he stroked the cord and then pushed it into the socket. Who let this guy teach?
It's not funny. I just literally cannot. Like, I don't even know how to react.
Well, it's just so gross. That he did something so gross that now we have to say the words to report on what his grossness is.
As he stroked the cord.
After the students went to Logos' superintendent in 2017, this teacher retired with an email from the superintendent thanking him for his service. He then landed a job with the Classical Christian Press and runs a Moscow small business. According to Peterson, at least one other Logos teacher has been accused of sexual abuse with a student, as reported to police 2 years after the abuse occurred. We're going to move on to another story. Kamila Niska, who is now 25 and attended Christ Church and Logos through 11th grade, describes being spanked with a wooden paddle in 6th grade. Once by a female administrator, once by a male principal. In a copy of the 2012-2013 Logos Parent-Student Handbook provided to Vice, the discipline policy states, "The principal may require restitution, janitorial work, spanking, or any other measures consistent with biblical guidelines which may be appropriate." Raised by an adoptive, single mom, Niska says she didn't get touched by adult men. So being bent in a prone position, hands on her principal's desk as he struck her, haunted her dreams. I would say so.
Mm-hmm.
Later in 10th grade, when Niska was covertly seeing a boy at Logos, Nancy Wilson, this would be Disgusting Doug's wife, started pulling her into classrooms to talk and asking her if they'd done anything physical. Were they in a relationship? Was she keeping pure? Since Niska left the school and church, she has heard about Nancy and Doug asking multiple students about their sexual activity. She said, quote, "He just wants to sit there and listen to everything that transpired between these two teen lovers, like all the graphic detail." Another former Logo student named Helen Shores was called in for a solo meeting with Doug Wilson after she lost her virginity at 16 to her then boyfriend, who had confessed they'd had sex to his parents. "Wilson wanted me to tell him in detail everything that happened when we had sex," says Shores, who was told by Wilson that her boyfriend had already told him everything. "So I needed to tell him in absolute detail what sexual experience happened, how many times it happened, and all that kind of stuff." Ew.
Like so many of these cult leaders, this guy gets off on making people so uncomfortable. It's this power dynamic of making people so skeeved out. He gets off on it.
Yeah, and I also think he gets off on having them describe every detail of their sexual experiences. It's
because as much as Doug is talking a big game, Nancy is not letting him into her garden
ever. Her garden is closed
for
locked
business.
Up.
Yeah,
sick.
It is. There is nothing growing there. No one is planting or pillaging or
accepting
anything. No seeds are being plowed.
Plowed. Nothing's getting plowed. That is right.
No. Now that we've beaten that farming analogy quite to death, we are going to talk about how the Kirkers do all of their counseling in-house.
Seems legit.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with this at all. Let's, get all of the school children who go to the Kirker schools and the church members who go to the Kirker churches and the married couples. And let's let these pastors, and I say that with quotes because they're not, talk them through all of their major life milestones. It seems like a very good idea. At the head of it all was Doug Wilson, who holds pastoral and counseling roles within the church. Although he has no formal theological training, did not graduate from seminary school, and is not a licensed counselor. But he is going to listen to your teenagers, give them all the dirty fucking details about how they had sex with their boyfriends. All right, so we are going to talk about a girl named Kimberly McCullough. Kimberly's ex-husband was an early Doug Wilson disciple. She was 56, dutiful. She homeschooled her kids. She read the Bible with her kids. She listened to her husband when he said stupid shit like, "No wife of mine is going to work." And when she needed his permission to cut her hair. But when he started disappearing from the home for long stretches and still demanding sex when he returned, she started feeling like, who is this strange man who wants to use my body? She knew not submitting to his wishes would be sinful because of Doug Wilson's teaching. And Jim Wilson, also not a licensed counselor or pastor, Doug's father, counseled Kimberly when she came to the church with her issues. She said that he told her that if the wife did not concede, she was in sin, and that she could be excommunicated from the church if she refused to have sex with her husband. She was incredibly religious. She really tried so hard to be a faithful congregant. She thought she did everything right. She really tried it. She couldn't understand why sometimes her throat would seem to close and her body suddenly gripped with panic. Well, it turns out she was having major anxiety attacks that went undiagnosed for years because she was being counseled by a fucking ninny idiot. When she finally left, the counseling sessions that she had done with Doug Wilson's dad, Jim, were used against her in her divorce case because Jim was not a counselor and not an ordained minister. He said he didn't have to maintain confidentiality. He saw himself more as a Bible teacher. So he spread her business all over the court, all over the community, and used all of her struggles against her when she finally left her husband.
One of the things that is so hard for me to grasp and understand is why any mother or father would bring a child, especially a daughter, into this life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite obvious that they think of women that they should look pretty and be ready for sex. And that is...
And shut up.
Literally it. And clean their house.
No, it is absolutely a cycle of brainwashing entire generations of women into thinking that they are not worth as much as men, and wrapping it in this pretty picture of they need to be cosseted and taken care of by their men, and that their job is just to create the home and raise the children. And, you know, let the men make all of the big decisions. You don't need to vote. You don't need to have an opinion about anything. Shh, just quiet down. Yeah. Shh. God doesn't want you to fret your pretty head.
Many of the emotional dynamics ex-members described in the church run parallel to coercive control in abusive relationships, while theological demands for submission normalize the same pattern at home. Church leaders, doubling as counselors, know how to hurt rebellious members. In a letter on Christchurch letterhead, the church's Center for Biblical Counseling ministry counselor Mike Boyer informed one woman after hundreds of hours of counseling that she was being suspended from the table of the Lord until she confessed and repented after leaving it up to her husband to clean and prep food, putting her kids in daycare, and ignoring the God-given roles, including submission.
How dare she make him prep food? Who does she think she is?
That bitch. Okay, so in a community as small as Moscow, how has Doug Wilson gotten away with this type of bullshit for the last 30 years? Well, just like every other cult leader, he has built his empire around the ideas of submission, discipline, and fear. For Kirkers, speaking up takes serious courage. There is a regular section in the printed church bulletin listing the names of those who have strayed. As one former member describes, a list of the excommunicated, along with a prayer request for repentance from sin. It functionally serves as a record of people whom Kirkers ice out. Families cut off loved ones over leaving the church. Others, as Jean found out, lash out against ex-members with harassment. Small businesses suddenly lose customers, and unfounded accusations make their way through the community. For years, Christian blogs such as Spiritual Sounding Board and the Wartburg Watch have detailed accounts of Christchurch's spiritual abuse, a phenomenon typically defined as faith leaders creating a toxic culture within a church or community and using their position to shame and control. Members of Christchurch have been terrified to speak out for decades, but that may be changing, as former and current church members are stepping forward now thanks to a new YouTube channel called On Courageous Empathy. Host Kevin McGill, a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, interviews ex-Kirkers about their experience with the church. Over recent years, multiple secret groups for Logos survivors have organized online. Among those who work to help survivors is Sarah Bader, who left Logos school as a kid. She's appeared 5 times on Kevin McGill's YouTube channel. Bader and others' public appearances on the channel have prompted more survivors to reach out. Since the channel's conception, 27 victims of some sort of abuse, whether it be spiritual, physical, emotional, or sexual, from within the church or its schools, have come forward.
And I watched one of these episodes with Sarah Bader on this YouTube channel, but it's really interesting. You guys should check it out.
I can't imagine how hard it would be to leave something that is all you have ever known.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think, too, knowing that there's a significant chance that you are going to be totally ostracized from your friends, your community, and even your family. A lot of times, these people's families totally cut them off. So they're alone. Okay. We're going to talk about a woman named Hillary. And this particular story I think it really encompasses the just level of nastiness of this man in this church. So Hillary Medina attended Christ Church from around age 9 to age 21. And she was 15 or 16 when her mom told her she needed to go speak to Nancy Wilson, who is Doug Wilson's wife. Unbeknownst to Hillary, her older sister's husband had sent a letter to Doug Wilson saying that Hillary's father had done something inappropriate to Hillary's sister when she was young. So Nancy asked Hillary if she felt safe around her father, and Hillary admitted she'd thought she had been watched in the shower through the bathroom window by her father. According to Hillary, Nancy confirmed that was actually her dad who had been watching her shower through the window, that he had confessed to it, as well as inappropriately touching her, which she had blocked out. Now, Vice reached out to this father when they were writing this article, and he did confirm that on a few occasions he watched her in the shower from the window. After about a week, the family was called into Doug Wilson's office to hear the father confess. Now, the father confessed to inappropriate behavior toward his eldest daughter for a year or two. At this meeting, Hillary's father asked her to forgive him for looking at her in the shower and, quote, other stuff that you don't know about. But he felt he didn't need to detail that since she was not fully aware of it and didn't really remember. She does remember back rubs that strayed to her butt and the sides of her breasts. Her father said he did not recall doing this, but said if she remembered it, it probably happened. Now, this is wild. While unclear whether criminal under Idaho law, unwelcome touching could potentially have violated the law against lewd conduct with children under 16 or other statutes.
I would say so.
Uh-huh. What? Not sure why that's unclear. Also in Wilson's office that day, the family cried and held hands. Her father says his behavior was his own choice. It wasn't caused by Wilson, and that Wilson counseled him to avoid being alone with Hillary in the future. Then Hillary remembers Doug Wilson telling her something that she has never forgotten. He said if down the road a bird or something hit the window when she was in the shower, she may think about her dad watching her, and that wouldn't necessarily mean that she was bitter, but she should confess the bitterness right away.
Oh, for fuck's sakes.
Hillary also remembers Nancy Wilson telling her in their subsequent counseling sessions that her father hadn't done anything illegal. When Hillary would mention, for example, a hug where he had grabbed her ass, Nancy Wilson suggested she give him the benefit of the doubt. That's the Christian thing to do.
I do not like this.
You know, we talked about this in the Von Ellinger case a little bit, about women who actively participate in the trauma of other women.
Right.
And that there's just, in my brain, there are very few things that I find to be more abhorrent than women who involve themselves in the abuse of other women this way.
Right. The other thing is, with Hillary Medina's story.
Yeah.
Her father was the one who had done something wrong, clearly, obviously. Yes. And yet they still turn it around on Hillary and tell her, she's wrong if she has bitterness in her heart, that she better confess that.
Yes.
Like, everything is just so turned around and backwards, it's hard to...
It has to be. They can't control people if people aren't confused and afraid.
You want to know what's confusing? The Christ Church website. I have to read you part of it because...
I looked at it and immediate was like, nah, I'm good. Just exited right out. I just couldn't do it.
They have the forms on there where you can tell on...
Yeah, the tattling forms.
Fellow members. And it goes on to where they're basically going to go before a judge and jury of the church. It is ridiculous. But in one of their drop downs, in one of their headers, is their mission and their distinctives and their constitution. But their distinctives is what really I read through, and it just killed me because who is writing this shit? But bear with me. Life is right at the center of God's purposes for this dead world of ours. But the way into this new world he is fashioning is quite similar to the way we got into the old world. We have to be born into it. A new world, a new creation, requires of necessity a new birth. How will the new world get people otherwise? But this new world is being established in the midst of the old house. It's like a remodel project in a house, but with nobody moving out while the work is in progress. The end result will be a completely new house, and there is some debris in the meantime. And you can see aspects of the old house disappearing, and the shape of the new house is becoming clearer, and the whole thing is quite exciting. Now I'm not done. Material from the old house can, and usually does, go into the new house. But in order for that to happen, it must be made new. It must be made alive. The old material has to become new material in order to go into the new house. This is the meaning of the new birth. And the transformation is no incidental or surface thing. It is not a matter of sanding or painting or carving. No, the dead stones are turned into living stones, which of necessity affects everything about the stone, except the fact that it is stone.
Oh, Jesus.
But stone that is alive now, which is not exactly a trifle. So not only is this a remodel project, but it is one in which the house is in the process of becoming a live organism. Now, what? Who wrote that?
Well, no, it's a word salad, and it is there to make people wander around in circles trying to figure out what the fuck they just read.
Let's listen to this. It gets better. Now, all churches have distinctives, and ours is no exception. We believe certain things are true, and not other things. And we organize our worship services in a particular way, and not in another way. And so on. What? I mean, and let's be clear, I am not making light of or making fun of the teachings of the Bible or Christianity.
This is not what that is. That is not neither Christian or Bible related. That is filler. It's fluff. There's
nothing to it.
There's nothing there.
It screwed me up.
We do it this way and not another way.
We organize in one way, but not another way. No shit, Sherlock. God.
Shut up, Doug.
Talk about a narcissist.
Oh yeah, I feel like we should just call this podcast "Narcissist" because it's literally everyone.
I know. Every time, like, oh, what a narcissist, and we do know the definition, sir.
Yes, we do. Let me tell you this, Idaho. Okay, did you know that there is a town in Idaho named Good Grief?
No.
There is. It is an unincorporated community in Boundary County. It was saluted in the early 1970s on the television show Hee Haw as having a population of 3 with 2 dogs and 1 old grouch. Now, that's not my Idaho, but the Idaho happens in Good Grief, Idaho. So there's a little background for you on Good Grief. So in Good Grief, back in 2021, a man named Owen Benjamin, who was at one time a comic, and had a supporting part in the 2008 Playboy-related movie The House Bunny, and he was also briefly engaged to Christina Ricci, bought 30 acres of land in Good Grief, Idaho. See, his acting career had tanked after he had become increasingly racist and anti-Semitic, and he had established himself as the leader of an alt-right group called, quote, The Unbearables, whose guiding principle appeared to be just allegiance to him. So he goes up there with his crew, and he's making videos, and he posted his videos online, and he described the property as this peaceful place to commune with nature and fish and hunt and form his own little community. But elsewhere, he posted different videos where he touted the land as a place where a paramilitary force will defend itself against the dark forces of modern life. He hoped to bring people to his community by describing it as, quote, new Ruby Ridge-style compounds.
Ugh.
The man who sold him this property realized too late that he had erroneously sold it to a crackpot, and he tried to raise a red flag to the County Planning and Zoning Committee, but it was too late. He did tell them he was worried about a potential unpleasant outcome with the group's presence in Good Grief. Now, the scary part is I cannot find what happened to this community.
Good grief.
Good Grief, Idaho. I do not know if this man is still up there building a Ruby Ridge 2.0 in Good Grief, Idaho.
Well, and did he, do his research on Ruby Ridge? Because no one that was there on either side of it would ever want another one.
No.
Dumbass.
Randy And Vicky would be like, shut up, Owen.
Exactly.
Go back to California. We don't need any more of you up here.
Not even one. Good grief,
Yes.
Idaho. That's very
Good
interesting.
grief.
I'm going to have to do a little bit of research on that. Well,
if you guys didn't sigh 35 times, then we did not do our job correctly.
I have no sighs left.
Yeah, I spent the last hour with my mouth hanging open, blinking at the screen.
I know, same. As I was watching some of his videos today and reading this stuff, I just was like, are we sure this is from the 1990s and 2000s and today and not from a man that lived in the South during the time of slaves? Like, I just can't.
Well, I think the scariest part is that because this man has figured out the internet and it's so easy to spread
Bullshit.
disinformation that he really has reached an entirely different sect of people.
He's reached the extremists and people who are people who have low self-confidence. They want somewhere to belong. They can belong there.
Yes. Particularly terrifying because he's an educated man. He has several degrees.
Right.
He went to school. And he's just smart enough to manipulate all of these people around him into thinking that he knows what he's talking about.
Well, he's got to be damn smart. And if you look at his list of staff members, there's doctors on there. Mm-hmm. There are other people who are educated.
Cult.
Well, that is the story of an evangelical cult and its disgusting leader, Doug Wilson, and his equally horrifying wife, Nancy. We hope you enjoyed hanging out with us today.
And if you did, we hope you still like us.
Yes, we do.
Please like wherever you listen to our podcast. You can subscribe to our show on patreon.com and get all kinds of cool monthly bonus stuff. There is a link in the show notes. It says support the show and it will take you right there. If you are interested in sponsoring the show, you can reach us at ghostsandgarnets@gmail.com. And you can find us on Instagram at Ghosts and Garnets Podcast and on Facebook at Ghosts and Garnets Murder in Idaho. We will see you next week with probably some gory stuff.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.